Inventing Guitar Mathematics, and I want to present a method for parsing Beatles songs between standard tuning and open G. Now, open G is a very important guitar tuning in rock and roll, and so there's an interesting competition going on because G is certainly a very good key in standard tuning by any measure, and a lot of these songs can be played in both standard tuning and open G. So you see people playing them, you see cover bands playing them in standard tuning, and the chords, you know, they may be the G, C, D chords that everybody knows, and you can play them in both tunings. So the question is how to parse the difference. And parsing is the analysis of sentences or sequences of symbols to establish what the grammar and syntax of the tablature sentences are. And so we want to see if we can tell the difference between the grammar of open G and standard tuning. Now when you think of open G, you think of a structure like the key of G, but much larger, because the open G tuning contains every key, and also the tuning can be intonated at a higher or lower level. So to kind of simplify things, I think of like open A, open G, and open F. And they're the same tuning, by which I mean they have this number that's 5, 7, 5, 4, 3. And then the open G, this note is G, in open A this note is A, and in open F this note is F. And so that creates a situation where you hear, say, an A minor chord in the record, and you have to ask yourself, okay, is that this A minor that's or is it this A minor, which would be an open A, and it has its tonic on the open string here. So, and again, you have like this chord is C in open G, and this chord is C in open A. And this chord is C in open F. So you have to consider how the guitar is intonated, and the way you recognize that is the pattern that you're looking for belongs to the tuning grammar. So for example, if Blackbird were in say the key of A flat or A, you would just think that the guitar is tuned or has a capo that changes the intonation, because Blackbird is a song many people play in standard tuning, and it's a very compelling arrangement, but it's more compelling in open G. And the one thing is clear though, that if you play it in standard tuning in the key of G, we all know how it goes, more or less. It goes like the way the sheet music shows, and there might be some personal variations that you have, but the pattern, given the tuning and the key, the pattern of the chords on the guitar is pretty well established. And the thing that I like about Blackbird and open G is, first of all, the way those diatonic double stops come off of the bottom of the guitar. So the bottom of the guitar is here, and the double stops go like this. Or in more fleshed out chords. And so I like the fact that the skeleton for that Blackbird arrangement is laid out that way, where it starts here and it all makes sense. Whereas in standard is a little bit of a problem because you have to start back here and then you get to the open position and walk up. And then the second thing is, because this note on this string is tuned down, the fret position goes up. So when I'm playing this chord, the fingers are at the same fret position, and that makes it easier to play and easier to remember. Whereas in standard, you have this split position where one finger is 2 frets behind the other. It's not a big stretch, but it makes it harder to move around and harder to remember. So in this open G version, those double stops are always at the same fret, or maybe staggered. That's like the 4 chord to the minor chord that you always hear in the Beatles. And so that makes it easier to play and remember, because they fall on the same strings in an orderly way. And then the thing you like about it in standard tuning is the way that the double stops harmonize with this G string as the inner voice, which you still have. And then what you're missing in standard tuning is these outer voices, which are D. So in the open D landscape, you have the same thing as in open G, where you have these 3 strings are tuned to D. But in open G now, these kind of bumper strings are on the 5th of the chord, not the tonic. And so the harmonization of these chords with these outer strings is important, and they don't all harmonize with the open D. Like at the C position, the D is kind of not so harmonic, so those outer notes are maybe hard to hear in the recording, but they're very compelling when you play it in open G, and it gives it a much richer texture. And so I think if you play this song in both open G and in standard tuning, you'll agree that open G wins. And this is kind of the principle of this lecture, is to show that the standard tuning hardly has a chance at comparing to open G in the key of D. Open G will always win. And you can sort of stake out a certain area of standard tuning in G that is more favorable because of that turnaround. Now, in the blues turnaround in open G is shifted. Like, you can think of open G as just being the same as open D, but shifted to one higher set of strings. So in open D, you have the 3rd of the chord is on this 3rd string, but open G is the family where the 3rd of the chord is on the 2nd string. And so the turnaround that we play in open G on the 3rd and 5th strings is moved to the 2nd and the 4th strings. And what you lose when you go from standard to open G is this turnaround where, and then I'm developing this stretch, and I can't really reach the last note of the turnaround. So that's one obstacle. And when you hear that kind of Gary Davis, Blind Blake G turnaround that everybody loves, that's kind of a tip-off. But it's not necessarily standard, because that you have that G turnaround with the tonic underneath it in this position. You have that also in drop D and drop G tuning. So it's not specific for standard, but if you hear that, then you know it's not pure open G. But then you get so many other G turnarounds. This tuning is so tilted towards G chords that it just appear everywhere on the fretboard, that you get these other, like this is the Robert Johnson turnaround, which comes off of this, that's a G7 chord that you hear like in Crossroads. and then the turnaround. So this figure comes up a lot in open G in the pentatonic scale, because this is those are the pentatonic notes in that turnaround. So a few more landmarks here. So you have this is the G chord, and it's a little bit harmonically impaired because the tonic is on the second bass string, which Keith Richards made a joke about taking the bass string off because it kind of gets in the way. And it sort of does, because it creates you're not supposed to play the fifth on the bottom of the chord. It gives you kind of a muddy sound. And so when you're playing this bar, you have to watch the intonation. You want to play these strings, and you don't want to play this bass string, although there's some exceptions, like when it's a minor chord and you want it to be nasty or mean, you can include that, or you can include it in an alternating bass, or in a bass run, or in a sequence of chords where like you have the slash chords, like say you have A, and then you have D, and then A/C sharp. And so if it's part of a moving bass line, you can have that. But when you're playing the bar chord, you have to watch the intonation carefully. And usually what I'm doing is have this finger touching the bass string and kind of deadening it, or else with my right hand I'm paying attention not to hit that bass string. With the exception of this one, this is D, so it's G, A, B, C, D. This one, this is the D string, is the tonic, so that's a special exception. And so you have this kind of chord slinging style where you're relying on these two chords, this bar chord here, which is C, and then this chord, which I call, like, this is the type 1 chord, because this is the chord that has the tonic on the number 1 bass string. So this is G, this chord is G. This chord is type 2, it has the tonic on the second bass string. So you have these sort of match chords that go up and down the neck, and they can be either major or minor because they're power chords. So this is G, D, G, this is C, G, C. So you can throw these chords around really quickly, and you have like your G chord here, and then it's already indexed on the fret for the C chord. So you just lay this chord down to make the C chord, the 4 chord. And then this chord is already indexed here. This is the D. So you kind of have this old style of this kind of old open G style of playing that's very melodic and sort of like Joni Mitchell's Clouds, and so that can kind of get a little cloying or tedious, and you may miss the hard rock quality of the tuning. So the earliest open G song in the music copyright series is Love Me Do, and it's a fairly simple open G rocker. Love, love me do, you know I love you, always be true, so please, love me do. Someone to love, somebody new, someone to love, someone like you. If you look at the ATV sheet music for that song, it's in the key of E. So that shows how they are already shifting the key around in this tuning. They realize these chords can easily be transposed. So to mark out the landscape here, you have the key of C is like 1, 4, 5, and the key of G is 1, 4, 5, and the key of D is 1, 4, 5, and the key of A is 1, 4, 5, and the key of E is 1, 4, 5. And I always think it's kind of surprising how strong the key of E is in open G, because you have this, the E pentatonic scale is basically like an E minor scale, and the E minor is the same scale as the G major scale. So you have this unique E pentatonic scale. It sounds totally different than the E pentatonic scale in standard tuning because it functions in a different way with the same notes. Best things in life are free. You can give them to the birds and bees that want money. I want money. That's what I want. That's what I want. So you have that kind of chord slamming where this is the B. And you can move those chords really fast. You don't have to, like, if you're changing between D and G, you can do it really quickly. And so when you have a song with the chords are like just at a blinding rate, you're always looking at open G to see if those chords, those power chords can be fit into open G, because these chords are so simple to play, and they're easy to remember because they like this can be either E minor or E. This can be either B major or B minor, and so a lot of times you're not thinking about really what you're just thinking about the position of the chord, and whether it's major or minor doesn't really matter. And the one I always have is this chord here. This is E major, or it can be E minor, as long as I don't hit the third the third on that second string. So you have this kind of, and that's kind of like a penalty chord, because you have to watch your intonation stay on these three strings, and you don't want to hit this note because it doesn't fit with the E minor. But as long as you don't touch that string, you're good. And so you kind of think of these bar chords as being kind of the stem of a pentatonic scale. Those are all pentatonic notes, and then I don't want to hit the third, so there's kind of an I that's created, where the pentatonic notes are avoiding that major third, and that I is kind of a point of reference that you mark the pentatonic scale with. And then that introduction to money is weird, because what happens in this tuning is the relation of the first two strings is the same as in standard tuning. So you could play that in standard tuning, but when you're starting off, this note is the tonic that makes the key F sharp. And so you have this cross note effect where, okay, these strings have the same relation as standard tuning, but they're shifted up 2 frets. And so if you think of your bar chord for G in standard tuning, which you play like this, you have the bar here, and then this looks like an E chord. And what's happened is, first of all, this note, when you tune this string down to D, this note goes up to here. And then when you tune this A down to G, this note goes up to here. And then finally, when you tune this string down to E, this note goes up to here. And so the result is you have an unplayable major chord, because it goes like this. And there's just no way your fingers can accommodate that chord. So it's kind of like the chord is fractured, and you have, this is the G on the bottom, this is the G on the top, and you can't play them both at the same time. But it does make an interesting figure for like an arpeggio, or as the basis of a diatonic or pentatonic scale, because it goes up, which is easy to play even though you can't play them all at the same time. So in open G, the notes go D, G, D, G, B, D. So if you pronounce it, it would be like D, G, D, G, B. And so that there's a parallel relation that whatever holds here is also, whatever holds on the first 2 bass strings also holds true on the 2 strings after that are tuned to octaves. So the other chord in open G that is a problem is the minor chord, because when you have the major chord and then the third falls back 1 semitone, you have this chord that you can't really finger in a reasonable way. You might be able to reach it that way with your thumb here, but usually what happens is you have to sort of decompose it into a sort of an A minor like chord, or try and grab a couple of strings. This way I have like these 2 fingers are both holding down 2 strings, and so there's some other solutions to that problem, but that's kind of it's open G is kind of minor chord impaired a little bit. Little child, little child, little child, won't you dance with me? I'm so sad and lonely. Baby, take a chance with me. And if you want someone to make you feel so fine, come on, come on. that's the ATV key in the sheet music. So P.S. I Love You is the first song in the copyright sequence that you could really tell that they get the open G chords. As I write this letter, send my love to you. Remember that I'll always be in love with you. Treasure these few words till we're together. Keep all my love forever. Yes, I love you. So it's got all the open G rock chords, and it's got this approach chord to the D that's like a diminished, and then with this B minor chord is kind of unique because you could play that B minor with this bar, but you can also play it with this chord as kind of like a Wild Horses Keith Richards chord, where you have the B minor is played like an A chord, either this way or this way with 3 fingers, and then the open first, second, and 6th string are just harmonized with that. So that minor chord is in a unique position where it can harmonize with the open strings, and that's particularly useful because this chord is a little bit harder to play, and you don't really gain anything with the additional fingers. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Imagine I'm in love with you. It's easy 'cause I know I've imagined I'm in love with you many, many times before. It's not like me to pretend, but I'll get you in the end. Yes, I will. I'll get you in the end. Oh yeah. I think about you night and day, and even know it's true. When I think about you, I can't say I never do. So I'm telling you, my friend, that I'll get you in the end. Yes, I will. But I'll get you. Oh yeah. So you can play that song in standard tuning, but what you have is this D chord is going to win out, because the D chord you have in standard tuning, first of all the bass string is not even in the chord, and then the A on this string is somewhat harmonically limited, so you have kind of a weak D chord, and you also have a fair amount of time required to change between the D and the C chords. So that kind of chord where it's just C, D, G, it's always going to be better in open G tuning. So when you're learning open G, you're always kind of making up these songs where the chords kind of rock back and forth between. I should have known that with a girl like you, that I would love everything that you do, and I do. Hey, 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 hey. Oh, whoa, whoa, why? I never realized what a kiss would be. And this could only happen to me. Can't you see? Can't you see? That when I tell you that I love you, you're gonna say you love me too. And when I ask you to be mine, you're gonna say you love me. So you have like this G, and this G, and this one is a little bit thinner, and sometimes it doesn't seem to sound quite right, but it's a good chord for singing over because the notes are kind of outside of the vocal range, and it's easy to move around, and it's also kind of strange because people feel like it's a weird chord and they not sound, it's kind of a muddy sound, but it's an important part of the style to master that chord, which I kind of think it's like it's a 2-finger chord, and you're playing these 3 bass strings, but you can't play any of the higher notes. And so 2 special locations for this chord is one is the G chord, which all the other notes will harmonize with. You just play these 2. And then the other one is the E chord, which can become an E minor 7 if you let the other chords ring out. I've got every reason on earth to be mad, cause I just lost the only girl I had. If I could get my way, I'd get myself locked up today, but I can't. I've got a chip on my shoulder, bigger than my feet. I can talk to the people that I meet. I could see you now, I try to make you sad somehow, but I can't, so I'll cry instead. I don't wanna cry when there's people there, I get shy when they start to stare. I'm gonna hide myself away, but I'll come back again someday. So that's a pretty standard open G lick, and then in a more advanced form, ring my friend, I said you call Dr. Roberts. Day or night he'll be there, anytime at all. Dr. Roberts, you're a new and better man, to help you understand, and does everything he can. Dr. Roberts. Well, you're doing fine. Well, Dr. Roberts. So the Beatles were interested in Buddy Holly, and Lennon said something interesting. He said that they thought Buddy Holly was playing in open G. Actually, he said we thought he was playing in G, but it was actually A, but it didn't make any difference. So what I think he meant is they thought he was playing this in open G, but it turned out that he actually was using open A, which is kind of electric guitar tuning, whereas you usually have an acoustic guitar open G. But it didn't matter because you ended up playing it the same way. And this Buddy Holly song shows how he's studying the sort of the field of G, where you have one way. Then and I like the sixth note on the 5 chord instead of the 7. Those are all G chords, and these are the same as in standard tuning because these inner 3 strings have the same relation as standard. So you have these thirds. Norwegian Wood is a classic open G kind of song, and it's achieved apparently with a capo. There's a picture of John Lennon playing guitar with a capo on the 5th fret, so that might have been when at that time, which would mean like he was using open A, and then with the capo on the 7th fret you get an E. But I'm going to play the lick in the open G without the capo, so it doesn't match the recorded key, but it's an example of where the lick is so specific for open G, you just adjust the intonation. It's like when Jimi Hendrix is playing Red House in E flat. You think the probability is he's probably playing blues in E, but just detuned, and you probably should consider more likely the fact that he's playing it in open D and that the recording is slightly speeded up to get that E flat intonation. But so the lick has a kind of, you can study this in several different positions and decide which one you think is right. We're harmonizing with the top string. And that roll is one of the things that makes me think it's in open G, although you could kind of get that in standard tuning too. it modulates between G and G minor. Makes me think that that verse part might be played in open G minor, because they have a relatively weak minor chord, G minor. You can sort of hide the B, you want it to be B flat, so it may be that has both tunings in it, and it's kind of overridden by the sitar effect. But what I think is they were sort of had the idea of making the guitar imitate the sitar by using the capo at a very high position. She said, I know what it's like to be dead. I know what it is to be sad. And she's making me feel like I never owned. She said, no, no, you don't understand. I said, no, 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 you're wrong. When I was a boy, everything was alright. Everything was alright. And she's making me feel like I've never been born. If the rain comes, they run and hide their heads. They might as well be dead. If the rain comes, if the rain comes, sun shines, they slip into the shade and sip their lemonade when the sun shines. Rain, I don't mind. Shine. Show you that when it starts to rain, that everything's the same. I can show. So those chords are very generic, but I just think that open G is a little bit more authentic than the standard. But there you have like a sort of comparable. That's driving me mad is going away. She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care. I don't know why she's riding so high. She ought to think twice if you ride by me before she gets to saying goodbye. She ought to think right, should you ride by me. So that melodic hook is right there. It's easier to play in standard tuning, but the chords are sort of generic. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. recording that when they released, there's hardly any guitar after the first chord, and it's in the key of F. So you're not inclined to think it's in open G. But in the Beatles anthology, there's an outtake where Paul plays the whole thing on guitar, and he starts off, he goes like this. And then he says to the recording engineer, it'll be an F for you. And then he goes, yesterday. But I'm in G. But it'll be an F because E minor to A7 to D minor. So he's telling us that he's playing in open G, but he's tuned down to F. So it'll be an F for you, but he's in G. If you let me take your heart, I will prove to you we will never be apart if I'm a part of you. Open up your eyes now and tell me what you see. It is no surprise now. And black the clouds may be, time will pass away. If you put your trust in me, I'll make bright your day. Look into these eyes now and tell me what you see. Don't you realize now that what you see is me? Though some have changed, some forever, I'm a forgetter. And some have gone, and some remain. There are places have their moments with lovers and friends. I still can recall our day that some are living in my affection for people and things that went before. Yes, I know I'll never stop and think about them in my life. I love you. Andrew Bird Can Sing is in open D, but it has an interesting version in open G, which I would have to capo to the 4th fret to match the key, but I just want to show these chord progressions. You tell me you've got everything, and your bird can sing, but you don't get me. You don't get me. When your bike is broken, will it bring you down? Look in my direction, I'll be round, I'll be round. So that E minor, then E minor over the E flat, then E minor over the D, on that E minor or the E minor 7 chord. I can't forget the time or place where we just met. She's just the girl for me, and I want all the world to see we can. Falling, yes I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again. So the octaves in open G are almost as good as the octaves. Well, they are as good as the octaves in open D, because you have this 3 courses. That's 1, 2, 3. And these octaves are easier to play than the octaves in standard, where you have this staggered octaves. The octaves when they're at the same fret, they're easier to play and remember than the octaves where they're staggered. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. All you gotta do is call me, baby. If you need somebody to love, look into my eyes. I'll be there to make you feel alright. If you're feeling sorry or sad, really sympathize. Don't be sad, just call on me tonight. Anytime at all. Anytime at all. All you gotta do is call, and I'll be there. You be good to me, you made me glad when I was sad, and eternally I'll always be in love with you. And all I've gotta do is thank you, girl, thank you, girl, thank you, girl, for loving me the way that you do. That's the kind of love that is too good to be true. And all I've gotta do is thank you, girl, thank you, girl. So in that song, the B minor chord and the D have this kind of a ching-ching sound that's often attributed to Lennon's Rickenbacker guitar, but I think it's also part of this open G style. How do you do what you do to me? I wish I knew. If I knew how you did it to me, I would do it to you. How do you do what you do to me? I'm feeling blue. If I knew how you did it to me, I would do it to you. You can't hear a feeling in my heart. I can never pass through it. I suppose that you think you're very smart. Won't you tell me, how do you do it? Now, in that song, the lick shows how you have to parse things in open G differently than standard, because this lick is the same way you play it in standard. And so when you adapt it to open G, what you do is you add 2 frets to every note on this top string, because the string goes from E to D, and so the frets move up too. And so it seems like you don't need to change that lick because these strings haven't changed their tuning. But this note presents a special problem because in standard tuning you can only play the D in this position, or you could play it up here, but in the first position you could only play it in one place. But in open G tuning you could play it in two places because now this D is also on the top string. So that raises the question, if there's two places to play the note, then there must be a rule for deciding which one is correct. And first, your idea is that, well, the open string is easier to play, and when it's on the top string, it's easy to reach. So that's always a better way to play it. But that's not true, because if you have a hammer-on, or a pull-off, or a slur, or if it's part of a sweep that's going across the strings consecutively, then you may want to choose the fretted position over the open position. And that decision, whether you play a note open or fretted, is one of the most nuanced stylistic decisions that you make. And it's always easier to play the note on an open string, but it creates a problem remembering the order of the strings, because it's very likely that the note on the open string will either be a higher note on a lower string or a lower note on a higher string. And so it creates an ordering which is a bit unusual. So that is the tuning number here is 5, 7, 5, 4, 3. And the two unusual things about that are the 3, which is kind of a contraction and creates a redundancy, and then the 7. So the 7 is like a stretch where it creates a situation where you can't reach all of the notes without moving your hand, because the size of the guitar anomaly makes it so you expect to have one finger on each fret. You go, and then I'm ready for the next string because I've used up all my fingers, as opposed to the violin or the mandolin, where you're more likely to play a couple of frets with each finger and have a diatonic spacing. So you sort of want it to be, the intervals to be 5, and when you have this 7 and this 3 here, it creates a kind of an obstacle in which at first it seems like it's really an unfortunate thing, and then later on you realize that it offers a number of opportunities for playing things that can't be played in other tunings. And in the open G inimitable style, which means you cannot imitate the chord progressions in this tuning in any other tuning. You can get close with the drop G or the G minor tunings, but those are more complicated to achieve. So this guitar slinging style is really a characteristic of open G. In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed the sea, and he told us of his life in a young submarine. So we sailed up to the sun, where we found the sea of green, and we lived beneath the waves in a young have 2 chords per measure, but it's not on the 1 and the 2 beat, it's on the 1 and the 4 beat. So you get it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And the rhythm of that is so closely connected to the way that the chords function that they're almost inseparable. That's such a classic open D song, and one of the things I like about it is this D7 chord. The tonic here moves down, and then and that's kind of because the open D position in the open D chord, open position D chord in this open G tuning is kind of challenged. It takes 4 fingers, and you're always kind of mourning the loss of that wonderful D chord that you have like in standard or drop D tuning, which is played with 3 chords like this. So now what happens is this top string is moved up, and also you've lost your A on this string, so you have to finger your D chord like this or like this, which takes more fingers and more work. So this is a really nice version of the D chord, but eventually you have to deal with playing the D and the D minor chord in the open position, which is a little bit more difficult. So this D7 is refreshing, and also the way that the chord progression fits in open G is really neat. So that in open G there's kind of a slur between chords. What happens is you can change chords so fast that it's a slur, one chord on the other, like this. Nothing to do, the same as life, all its wife, nothing to say but what a day, how's the boy been? Nothing to do, it's up to you. I've got nothing to say but it's okay. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Going to work, don't wanna go, feeling low down. Hunting for home, you start to roam, then you're in town. Everybody knows there's nothing doing, everyone is close, just like the ruin. Everyone you see is half asleep, now you're on your own, you're in the streets. After a while you start to smile, now you feel cool. Then you decide to take a walk by the old school. Nothing has changed, it's still the same. I've got nothing button the skirt, you start to swerve in gear. You go to the show, you hope she goes. I've got nothing to say, but it's okay. Gets dark, I tear your heart away. Standing by a parking meter when I caught a glimpse of Rita filling out a ticket in a little white book. In a cap, she looked much older, and a bag across her shoulder made her look a little like a military man. Lovely Rita, Rita made me look quiet and sweet. When you take some tea with me. So that's a really original key. The sheet music says it's E flat, but it's really, I think, terminates on the B flat chord. So I think it's more like a Mixolydian B flat. You want to keep your eye on this E minor chord and then the E minor 7. I read the news today, oh boy, sad. Well, I just had to laugh. I saw the photograph. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, and I went downstairs and I drank a cup. Looking up, I noticed I was late. I found my coat, grabbed my hat, made the bus in seconds flat. Then I went upstairs and I had a smoke, and somebody spoke and I went into a dream. Read the news today, oh boy. 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. And though the holes were rather small, they had to count them all. Now they know how many holes it is into the Albert Hall. I'd love to turn you on. So that song shows how the music is conceived or composed on the guitar and then sometimes transferred to other instruments. And I think it's interesting how it captures that crescendo, which is done by an orchestra in the record, as a guitar composition, and it goes back to that first Love Me Do song where they play the song in the key of G on the record, and in the sheet music they're playing it in E. So they change from E to G, and in this song they modulate the key from G to E through that chord walking up. And so that shows how they're initially interested in finding the right key, in parsing the key that's best for the recording, but also that they understand that these chords can transpose the key very easily. And when you're changing the key, one method is you have a certain musical phrase that you state in one key, and then you just repeat the same phrase in the new key, and that automatically establishes the key. So the fact that you have this movable set of chords that you can just move up or down and change the key gives a opening for this kind of key bending or key changing modality that the Beatles used so brilliantly. Well, that song is interesting because it has this chord which resembles the E7 sharp 9 that you have in open D minor. It's the same, we're recycling the same form. This one finger here and this bar across the top two strings. But now this is an E7 flat 9. Because this top string is moved up, so this is no longer the sharp 9, it's the flat 9. And it's a kind of a more jazzy chord, which doesn't have that marvelous gray neutral tonality of the 7 sharp 9. The 7 flat 9 is more of a chord that is an extension on, say, the 5-7 chord, or in a circle of fifths it might occur. And so that chord and then the walk up on a minor key blues, which is more of a European form, I think, than that you don't often see, or as often see, the minor key used for blues like the way you would in Django Reinhardt's music, where he's got a lot of the blues progressions, the 12-bar blue progression, where the 1 and the 4 chords are minor. So it's kind of surprising how the minor keys, the D minor, A minor, and E minor, are so good in open G. Now the A minor is perhaps not as good as, say, the A minor in open D minor tuning, or maybe even in standard, but it does have a very interesting expression on its own.
My bell, these are words that go together well.
très bon, très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I love you, I love you, that's all I want to say. Until I find a way, I will say the only words I know that you'll understand. So, in that context, it seems like it's more like a diminished chord, because they have this obvious diminished chord here, which walks down on that. So perhaps they see it as a diminished chord. But I think it's interesting that both those songs have that 7 flat 9 chord, and then of course that marvelous modulation between it's like, is the key D minor or D, and with the lead, I suppose, by George Harrison, where he's clearly playing in open E minor in the key of G, which is what, if it's standardized, it would be the key of F. So what they're doing is they have 2 different tunings. It's clear as day. They're using 2 different tunings, and they sound like one. You can't distinguish that one guitar is tuned different than the other unless you realize the chords on the guitar. And so a lot of these songs, they're good songs when they're written out in the sheet music, but the brilliance doesn't really light up until you put them in the context of the tuning. And then it's like, oh wow, that is such a great composition, because it's so easy to play. So those chords are kind of generic, and they have a kind of a sister version in open D minor tuning. But I notice on the record you can clearly hear these. So I think that's the tuning. It would be intonated as open F to match the record. Tell lies thinking I can't see. I'm down, you're laughing at me, and I'm down, I'm really down. Down on the ground, I'm down, I'm really down. How can you laugh when you see I'm down? How can you laugh when you see I'm down? The man buys a woman and throws it away. Same thing happening every day, and I'm down, I'm really down. I'm down on the ground, I'm really down. How can you laugh? This chord, the D chord with the bar, is key to this open D string. So you can, this is the one position where you can allow that D to sound in the bass. And so what happens is, this is kind of the triple D point, because all 3 strings are D when I'm fretting this at the 7th fret. And in this chord, these 2 Ds, these octave Ds, are almost indistinguishable to the ear. So when the transcriber hears this chord, he recognizes just one D, and he assumes that the other tone is just an overtone. And this leads to an interesting grammatical error that you see in standard tuning, where you have an alternating bass. And the bass would be, say, alternating between the 6th and the 4th string on every chord. And then when you come to the D chord, the bass doesn't alternate, because in standard there's no other D chord. Like here, I can alternate on the D string, but when that transfers to standard tuning, then both notes will appear on the 4th string. And so that's a kind of error you get in the wrong tuning. So that kind of thinking, like you're thinking this chord has a special relation to the open string, leads to the drop C family of tunings. Now, the drop C family is a tuning where the D string in the G tuning is dropped to C. So this is D. So now I have open G, drop C tuning, and this shifts the tuning in favor of the key of C, because this open G chord, this open C chord has lost its usual tonic. Usually you play the note that names the chord here, 5th string, 3rd fret, but now it's moved up to 5th string, 5th fret, and you can't reach it from the open position chord. So you have this C/G in the bass chord, and it's a very rich chord, but it doesn't always serve for a rock chord, because it's got a lot of sustain and sort of a country sound. So when you tune this lower string to C, what happens is you harmonize it with this bar and with this bar, and then you get the open, the bar chord F can also harmonize. And then you get this weird thing where the 3rd has moved up close to the bar. So you get this rich chord with the 3rd in the bass, because this is A and this is C sharp. So when you have a song like It's All Too Much that's in the key of C, you always want to parse that with the possibility that it could be in the open C family. So you have this group of sort of perfect tunings, which have either perfect 5ths or perfect 4ths between the 3 bass strings. So in standard goes 5/5, so that's perfect 4th, perfect 4th. And open D goes perfect 5th, perfect 4th, because you have 7/5. And in this tuning, it's 5/7, so that's perfect 4th, perfect 5th. Or actually, that's an open G. And in the C tuning, it's perfect 5th, perfect 5th. And so that creates a very unusual, very interesting tonality. It's distinctly different from open G, but very hard to understand, because if you make recordings of yourself, what you'll find out is you cannot really identify this C note, the C note. It's too low. I can barely pick it up with my tuner, and it's very hard to recognize this tuning. It's all too much. It's all too much. When I look into your eyes, the love is there for me. And the more I go inside, the more there is to see. It's all too much for me to take, the love that's shining all around me. And everywhere, it's what you make much. It's all too much. When I look into your eyes, the love is there for me. And the more I go inside, the more there is to see. It's all too much for me to take. The love that's shining all around me. Everywhere is what you make for us to take. It's all too much. It's all too much. Same chords. So that drop C configuration sort of electrifies the guitar. When you're playing it, it's a big difference. But it may not come across in a recording. It's a very subtle kind of tuning, and so I think it's just impossible to recognize in that George Harrison song which tuning he's using unless you play them both, and then you realize that the drop C configuration for that key of C song really adds something to the song, but kind of hard to put your finger on it when you're listening to it.
Little blue gone, where, oh, where can he be? Down the road at the dairy farm, he loves chasing all the cows round, driving the farmer crazy. When my old blue comes running home, my old blue comes running home to me.